everyone, and welcome to the Foster Files, a podcast about animal rescue and welfare. My name is Kelly, and every week I talk about issues surrounding animals in this country and to the people who are passionate about making their lives better. But today, I should have expanded my intro to say I talk about issues surrounding animals in the world, because I am joined by Cameron Harsh, Interim Executive Director for World Animal Protection. With a history dating back to the 1950s, World Animal Protection works across the globe in disaster relief and animal welfare action. So I am very excited to have Cameron joining me today. Welcome, Cameron. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me, Kelly. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, I am excited to learn all about what you guys do. I have been exploring your website and getting a take, and your reach is literally global and for decades. So tell me a little bit about the history of World Animal Protection and maybe even how you became involved.
Yeah, so you mentioned we have been around in some form or another since 1950. So we actually just celebrated our 75th anniversary last year, which was really exciting. We were founded in 1950 and previously known as the World Society for the Protection of Animals, but rebranded in 2014 to World Animal Protection. And it really is that global element that makes us strong and makes us unique. We have our international headquarters in the UK, and we have 12 country offices. So we have country offices in Australia, New Zealand, Thailand, China, India, several offices across the European Union and in the UK. We have an Africa office that operates out of Nairobi, Kenya, and we have Brazil, Canada, and the US over on this side. So it's really that global reach that is incredible and gives us kind of the impact and scope that we're looking for. And it was the global nature of the work that drew me to World Animal Protection when I first started in 2018.
Well, and so when you first came on, did you come in like a volunteer capacity or like what type of work do you do for I know you're the interim executive director now, but I'm sure that that has morphed and changed over time.
Absolutely. So I've been the interim executive director for the US organization for about a year now, since March of 2025. But I came to the organization as a farming campaign manager. So I was running all of our campaigns for farmed animal advocacy and ending factory farming in the US, which at that time was really focused on ending some of the most cruel confinement practices that are common in the factory farming industry. So gestation crates for mother pigs, where they spend the duration of their pregnancy in a crate that doesn't allow them to lay down comfortably, turn around, stand up comfortably, really just horrifically confines them to a very small space. And also advocating for better conditions for the chickens who are raised for meat, which we raise more than 9 billion chickens each year in the US alone for meat. So that's 9 billion individual animals just in the US for factory farming of chickens. So I was running our farmed animal campaigns until about 2021 when I became the director of campaigns for the US.
So that's one avenue of animal welfare, which is somehow simultaneously massive, impacted in our lives, impacting our lives daily, and yet we have yet to talk about it on after over almost 50 episodes on the podcast. So let's talk a little bit more about that. And to be totally honest with you, I think the reason that I haven't really talked a lot about it is because I'm kind of scared to learn how bad it really is. And so I'm just being candid. I'm sure that I have a lot of listeners that feel the same way. I think that a lot of people don't want to think about what's going on. So go easy on me if you don't mind. But I guess my first question would be, how is it possible that knowing what we know about it and organizations like your own and like PETA, who I think of offhand, have been around for so long, how is it possible that it's still so cruel? I understand how it's possible that we haven't gotten rid of it. I don't know that our system can support that in its current state, right? It's like when people say we got to get rid of coal, but we don't have an appropriate alternative that can support our energy, need that we have in this country. So that part I kind of understand, but how the hell is it still so cruel? Like, what are the forces that are working against the action that you guys are taking?
Yeah, it's a really complex system and it's a really powerful system. And I think what people don't realize as well is that factory farming, this sort of industrial scale animal agriculture where we decided to confine as many animals as possible indoors and get them kind of as fat as possible, as fast as possible to produce as much output as possible, whether that's the meat or the dairy that they're producing. It's actually a relatively recent phenomenon. I mean, we're talking about the last several decades of meat and dairy growth in the United States. And then that's actually still expanding around the world today. So it's really the United States and a couple other countries that are leading the way in this sort of intensification of producing animals and generating the products that we choose to consume from them. And it's an industry that has become extremely powerful very fast. The trade groups for the pork producers, for the Cattlemen's Association, for the Turkey Federation, and the Chicken Council, they have millions of dollars to give to lobbying efforts to make sure that they're being heard and that their influence is being heard in our national and state governments. So it's really built a system where they have the power and the influence. And so they get the policies passed that enable them to continue to scale up and really hit that economic bottom line. They're thinking about animals not as individual sentient beings that deserve our respect and deserve to thrive, as World Animal Protection is fighting for. They're thinking about animals as cogs in a machine, as products on an assembly line that they're trying to get out the door as fast as possible. And so they've really done a lot of work to make sure that cows, pigs, chickens, and turkeys are not included in our Welfare Act. They are not protected by a lot of our federal laws that protect other species. And so they get to kind of use business as an excuse to treat animals cruelly and confine them in horrible measures because it makes things, from their perspective, more efficient and more cost effective. What World Animal Protection is really trying to expose is when you scale animal agriculture to the extent that we have, it actually has ripple effects and so much damage in other areas that people maybe care a lot about, but don't necessarily know about. We're deforesting the Amazon and other really pristine ecosystems to grow more corn and soy to feed farmed animals. We're polluting waterways outside of these factory farms and killing the fish and amphibians that survive on those waterways. And in terms of human rights, workers in this industry are some of the most abused and exploited workers across any sector. And the number of injuries and the percentage of industries injuries that happen for workers in slaughterhouses is just horrific.
So we're getting a little ahead of usually I talk about calls to action like closer to like the end of the episode, but I would be interested in knowing what somebody like me could even do when we're talking about that scale, right? Like, I think that there's a lot of these massive issues that are going on that we think about, well, like, how can I even have an impact? And so, what advice would you give to somebody like myself?
Yeah, I'm definitely very passionate about our food system. So definitely rein me in if we start to get too ahead of things.
Okay.
But there's two main things. One is very timely. We have an action alert out to our supporters, and we have a page for it where there is a bill being considered by our Senate right now that is the Farm Bill, which is a piece of legislation that covers all things food production and food consumption for the United States and is reauthorized every 5 years. So the version of the Farm Bill that we have now actually has some language in it that is really, really terrible for animals. It actually withdraws or gives authority to overturn laws that have passed in California and Massachusetts that ban gestation crates, that ban crates for veal calves, that ban intensive confinement of chickens. And if this bill passes, it would disallow states from making their own rules about how animals are raised in their state and the type of standards they want for animal agriculture. So we have an action to our supporters to call your senators and tell them to vote no on this version of the Farm Bill that includes this horrible language. And as an individual, we can make daily choices that make a difference. The average American consumes over 200 pounds of meat each year, and it's that kind of consumption, which has been perpetuated by the companies that are trying to convince us we need meat at every meal, we need dairy in our diets on a daily basis, that we should consume more and more animal based protein. Making those swaps one meal at a time, making those reductions in the amount of meat and dairy you're consuming is an important measure to send signals to the industry that, like, this has gone too far. We need to pull back.
So I would imagine that there would be a benefit should someone have access to it to maybe buying from like a local farm. Is that beneficial in any way, or does that still kind of support the system in a way that I'm not considering?
It certainly depends on what you're going for. I certainly, and World Animal Protection certainly advocates for knowing as much as you can about the food choices you're making, which is extremely difficult in the United States today when you go to the
Right,
grocery store and look at a label.
right.
So going to speak to an actual farmer, buying directly from a farmer is probably the best way to make informed choices. If you are looking for alternatives to meat and dairy, there are a lot of products out on the market today, either that attempt to replicate meat and dairy or just provide healthy proteins made from plants. That there's a lot out there for a diverse diet that is very, very reduced in animal proteins or eliminates animal proteins. So there's a lot of choices for individuals to make. It's very much accessible to kind of get some more of that information. But if you're really looking to have transparent choices, if you can speak directly to farmers, that's probably the best way to go.
So I and again, we're going like on a tangent I wasn't expecting, but I'm grateful for. So please forgive me if I go kind of beyond what your knowledge lies in. But and I don't think that I will because you know far more than I do. But let me ask you this. What do you have to say for the argument about the cost for families, right? We know right now everything is going up in a way that feels very unsustainable generally, right? Everything from gas to groceries to mortgage rates to cars, literally everything is increasing. So when we talk about going with some of those alternatives and maybe going directly to a farmer, I think inherently we do understand that it is going to be costlier for us. So what kind of conversation do you have with someone when they bring up that concern?
Yeah, it's a challenging issue, and everybody needs to prioritize feeding their families and making sure that their families have access to healthful foods that are well-rounded, that give them the opportunity to thrive and the nutrition to thrive. And those choices aren't easy, especially from a cost perspective. And knowing that inflation is hitting us and hitting our wallets in so many different directions. The 2 points that we often make, one is that some of these manufactured processed products that are available that are replicating meat, that are trying to be a direct alternative for the meat on your plate, they can be costly compared to the animal based protein. But there's a lot of whole plant forms of proteins, beans, nuts, legumes, other things that are whole crops that are actually more cost effective than animal proteins in certain cases when you're buying whole beans, dry beans, canned beans. So it's not necessarily just, you know, to replace a cow-based patty with another processed patty, you have to think kind of diverse protein sources. And then the cost issue is a little bit more nuanced and accessible in that sense. We also like to point out that obviously this isn't on the individual consumer, and it's why we need to change policies. But the cost of animal products in the grocery store are artificially deflated because of the power that the industry has. They actually get to cut costs because they get subsidies from the government or they get, breaks from the government. So their products are being sold at a very, very low cost because they're not responsible for costs that they're taking on in their supply chain. They're not paying for their pollution. They're not paying workers a fair living wage. They're not giving their workers health care and health benefits. So if you were to actually account for all of those things, meat and dairy would actually be really expensive if you actually incorporated those costs into the products. But the companies get away with not paying those costs.
So there's so much more um, impact, like to your point, than just how the animals themselves are being treated on an individual basis. I mean, there's a social impact and an economic impact that we don't know about because they don't want us to know about it. They don't want us to be informed on what's really going on in factory farming.
Yeah, and we published a report a few years ago called The Hidden Health Impacts of Factory Farming, and it does provide some economic figures to some of the health repercussions from factory farming itself and from high consumption of animal proteins and kind of imbalanced diets. But there's a lot that is happening that is putting health costs on consumers or health costs on our health sector and our medical industry that factory farming is actually responsible for those costs.
So, one of the things that I do for my listeners is anytime we get some incredible information in during the course of the show, I will put links in my show notes. So I'm going to put the link for again for finding your senator, so that you can find who is your representative at the federal level, because this is going to be important because that is a federal bill that you discussed. I'm going to put a link that describes the bill itself. And if you do still have that report that you just referenced on your website, that I can find that pretty easily and link that up.
Yeah, it's on our website, and I'm happy to send that
Great.
link to you over after as well.
Perfect. So we'll get all that information up there. So let's take a little bit of a turn, because one of the things that I wanted to talk about, because I'm so interested in it, is World Animal Protection also does a tremendous amount of work in the disaster relief side of things for animals. And we are seeing, again, when we talk about massive issues, we are seeing worldwide disasters also start to become more frequent and larger events. So, what can you tell me about some of the work that you guys do on that side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. And so our organization, when it was founded back in 1950, was really a disaster response and animal rescue organization at its core. And we have that history behind us today. But what we did for, the first few decades of our existence was be send teams on the ground when natural disasters struck and help rescue animals who are often forgotten when disasters strike and people are evacuating or even making pre-disaster plans and pre-disaster measures. Animals were often forgotten or not taken into consideration, or the local governments and local relief agencies didn't have the skills and expertise to rescue wild animals, rescue companion animals, rescue farmed animals when disasters struck. So we sent teams on the ground all over the world when disasters struck, did direct animal rescue, and also started a system of training relief agencies and relief branches of national governments in how to prioritize and protect animals in disaster plans. So you have that in your plan before a disaster strikes, and how to make sure that there's the proper veterinary care and response when disasters do strike to care for animals who are also victims of that same disaster, along with the humans of the community. So we did a lot to really build out the trainings for governments all over the world. And today we have pivoted somewhat in our strategy to really focus, since we are a global organization with a lot of campaign impact, on really ending and transforming these global systems that exploit the most animals on a regular basis. So, kind of these, I'd almost call them long running disasters like factory farming or wildlife trade or the captive animal tourism industry. But we still have our disaster relief fund, where when disasters do strike, we can action that fund and really help those on the ground advocacy organizations that are rescuing animals, help them get more resources, help them get the attention they need, and be that resource for them still. So we did that most recently for the wildfires in the Los Angeles area in January of last year, and helped a number of organizations who were rescuing particularly native wild animals in that region.
What does a good disaster preparedness plan look like for an individual with companion animals?
Well, that's a really good question. We have a lot of resources on our website on making sure that your companion animals are part of your disaster plan. Mostly is making sure that, if you have your to-go bag, kind of your evacuation kit, make sure it has your companion animals' food for several days. If it's, in the wintertime, make sure there's blankets and clothing for them, that you have access to a fresh water source for them. So bring water along for them as well as for yourselves, and just make sure that they're a part of your to go kit. If you are evacuating and can bring them to a place where they can stay with you as a member of your family, that's ideal. There are hotels, particularly in disaster events, that will allow animals to stay at the hotels as well. And if for some reason you are not able to care for your animal because of the disaster, or need to make sure that they are safe somewhere else, contact your local shelters and rescue groups. They'll be able to point you in the right direction.
What additional steps are there, or additional thinking is there for someone who might have like different livestock type animals too, right? Well, maybe they have a horse, a couple of horses, alpaca, chickens, ducks, that kind of thing. Because I live in Western Pennsylvania, as you know, and you don't have to go far from my house for there to be people that have a lot of those types of animals. So, what does that additional planning look like?
Yeah, it certainly depends on where you live and what type of disaster you might be facing. But in a lot of areas in which it's common to have some of these larger animal species like alpaca, horses, even cows and pigs, they likely have a system for allowing people to bring their animals to like a local fairground or a local high ground area in the case of a flood. And there are some measures in place where the community knows where to bring these animals so they can be safe during the disaster and can be picked up afterwards. It is highly variable, so it's hard to kind of say something that would apply across the board, across the country. But there certainly are resources like that in most places where it is common to have these sort of larger species in your home or on your property.
Well, so it sounds like what I hear you saying, which is completely reasonable, which is do the work ahead of time as far as like the homework is concerned. So you at least know where those recess sources are or how to access them. Make sure you have access to the contact information so that you're not panicking when something is headed your way.
Absolutely. Do the work ahead of time, do your homework. We have a lot of resources on our website, as I mentioned. And certainly, if you are a small independent person with some larger animal species like that, it's much more feasible for you. And we did another report several years ago where we worked with a researcher to look at how farmers in North Carolina handled Hurricane Florence back in 2018. And unfortunately,
Mhm.
in the kind of industrial factory farming animal ag scale, they're incentivized to simply lock the barns, leave all the animals in there to whatever fate may befall them, which in that case was a lot of flooding and drowning for pigs and chickens. Because they are going to get insurance payouts for it. There's no way to evacuate that many animals all at once safely. So their incentive is just to close the doors and get themselves away while leaving the animals to endure the storm.
Like I said, I am not mentally prepared to handle how bad factory farming is, and I'm not making light of it. I just think it's one of those things that I am just like um really, really naive to how bad it is, but almost like protecting myself. Is that, I mean, do you understand? You kind of see what I mean, that sucks to say to somebody who's doing the work, like you're doing the work. I need to be more informed, but it's really overwhelming to me to hear how bad it is.
It is overwhelming, and it's definitely a very common and reasonable reaction to either not be able to take it in or to kind of have that cognitive dissonance of just needing it to be a bit outside of yourself because we are needing to also get through our own day-to-day experience. We need to feed
Mhm,
ourselves, we need to feed our families, make sure that we are healthy and cared for, and the people that we love and care about are healthy and cared for. So there's a lot, especially now, to really consider and make those choices about what we pay attention to. So it's a perfectly reasonable response. I will say that the meat and dairy industry also puts a concerted effort into making sure that we don't know what's going on, that it's hard to find out what's
right.
going on. And then when we do start to find out what's going on, they change the narrative really fast. They have a big, what we like to call the meat marketing machine. They have a lot of power
Mhm,
behind ad campaigns and marketing and changing the narrative. So
mhm.
it's very intentional as well to make you look away.
Well, any millennial or older generation will remember very distinctly the Got Milk campaign
Yes.
from the 90s, right? I mean, I literally had a friend who would see those ads with the celebrities with the milk mustache, and she would rip them out, and that was what was on her bedroom walls. So it was a very intentional ramp up in, this product that we need some of the things that are in this product, but we need it to that degree? Definitely not. I mean, we went through gallons of milk every week when I was a kid. It was just like breakfast, lunch, dinner, you drank milk. And I think that's a very true millennial specifically experience, if I can be so bold as to say that.
I absolutely agree. Those Got Milk campaigns were iconic and definitely live in my memory as a millennial as well, who grew up
Yeah.
in the 90s. And I think what people don't know as well is there is an entire branch of our US Department of Agriculture called the Agricultural Marketing Service. Its entire job is to market US animal products. And there's a program where dairy farmers pay into something called a checkoff program. And their payments into that program fund marketing campaigns that the government runs to promote dairy. So our government is an advertiser for the dairy industry. It's true for pork as well. So it's a really intense system. Of that Got Milk campaign was paid for and helped created for in part by the government.
I mean, and now that you're saying this, I'm thinking of others. I'm also thinking of The Other White Meat, which was pork campaign, which I think goes closer to like the late 80s than it does like the late 90s.
Yeah.
And then a very famous and successful one, which is definitely the 80s, is Where's the Beef?
Where's the beef? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy when you really think about the way that the decisions we make on a daily basis, the massive entities that are backing that and making those decisions for us almost in a way that we don't even recognize or that we grew up just accepting and now we accept it as adults.
Absolutely. And right now, the conversation is all about protein, and everything has added protein, and it's
Yeah.
really an emphasis on animal based protein. And the reality is, most Americans are not under consuming protein on a daily
Mm,
basis. And that's going to be highly variable depending on so many factors physiologically and, for yourself. And it's very individualized. But generally speaking, Americans are consuming more than enough daily intake of protein, and Americans are under consuming things like fiber. And there is now kind of a
mhm,
nascent conversation turning to fiber, which is really important and kind of rebutting and debunking some of these myths about protein. One myth being that it has to come from animal based sources, which certainly it does not, especially not every meal or every day. And this myth that, so for some reason, Americans are just not getting enough protein and need more milk and more meat, which is just
mhm.
not true.
Yeah, I think about my protein intake every single day. And part of that is and I've never shared this on the podcast, but I don't care. I'll share whatever I want. But I'm actually on a GLP-1 right now, and so far I've lost about 45 pounds. But part of the way that we want to make sure that I continue to be healthy is to make sure I'm getting all the nutrients that I need so that I'm not just, you know, gonna gain the weight back or I'm gonna be in an unhealthy situation. I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow. I'm doing it all the right ways. But yeah, I think about my protein intake every single day just to make sure, and I'm taking fiber and I'm thinking about my carbs and all that kind of stuff just to make sure. But it is very difficult to silence that, especially if you're anywhere near any type of social media platform. It's very difficult to not hear that. So I think it's just important for people to remember but there are other protein sources outside of the animal protein that can be and might even be healthier for you, or at the very least, just as healthy and effective for you.
Absolutely. Not only are there other sources of protein, but anytime the conversation is really hyper focused on just one macronutrient, you really have to kind of look into it further and investigate what they're saying and what those products are offering by these high protein amounts per gram or per calorie of food. We really need to be thinking about food, our food system in terms of how we raise food and also how we consume food from a lens of diversity. We need diverse sources of diverse nutrients to thrive as humans.
We're having a much bigger social conversation than I was expecting. I'm so surprised and pleasantly surprised by it. So let's focus a little. Let's go back a little bit to like the work that World Animal Protection. Not that this isn't the work that they're doing, but let's go back a little bit. So we talked a little bit about some of the advocacy around factory farming. We talked a little bit about the disaster preparedness education and the disaster relief funding that you're currently providing. Let's talk a little bit about that wildlife trade that you touched on. I have been getting some exposure to that when I've talked to bird sanctuary and I talked to reptile sanctuary, but it is so much bigger than just those two types of animals. So tell me a little bit about some of the um, current concerns around that and things that are still happening that, again, we might not know enough about.
Yeah, so World Animal Protection globally has two programmatic goals. One is end factory farming, which is kind of what we've been speaking about on the pod so far, and the other is ending the commercial exploitation of wildlife. And thousands of different species are traded and trafficked around the world each year, and it really is a billion-dollar industry. And it's actually multiple industries kind of operating within this umbrella of wildlife trade. And it's really hard to kind of get at all of the various aspects of it. So we do have to make some intentional choices about what areas we focus on based on where we're operating around the world. So our office in China is very much focused on the traditional medicine industry. And a lot of the traditional medicines and pharmacological products in China have historically had ingredients that are derived from animal parts, tiger paws, rhino horns, etc. And a lot of those animals, come from the African continent or they come from other areas of East Asia. And what our office in Beijing is really working to do is get the medical community in China on board on the plant-based ingredients that have the same purported effects as some of these animal based ingredients and really shift the whole medical industry away from animal based products and wildlife farmed, wild caught, or trafficked products and show that there's plant based medicinals that are effective and can be supported by the industry there. So that's a big campaign for us. One of the issues that that region is facing is bear bile, which thousands of bears are still farmed in China, kept in cages in buildings, so that the bile from their gallbladders can be extracted. And so, really working with countries in that region to ban bear bile farms and phase out that industry. So we were involved in phasing out bear bile in Vietnam and most recently in South Korea. And so China is kind of the next frontier of that bear bile industry. Um, in the US, in our wildlife trade work, we're very much focused on the pet trade, which has similarly many different species, but thousands, even millions of animals that are either wild caught or bred in kind of warehouses like mills. Like we think of puppy mills now, because a lot of
Mm,
organizations have done a lot of great work to expose what's really happening when you buy a puppy from a pet store or from a major breeder.
mhm.
But the same thing is happening to reptiles for the popularity of bearded dragons and other reptile species. Parakeets and other parrot species are bred in mills. It's a huge industry and a very cruel industry with high mortality and high injury rates in the US. So we're working on policy change to ban the sale of live animals in pet stores and trying to push companies like PetSmart and Petco to do the right thing and stop selling live animals in their store. Certainly offering animals who are in need of rescue or are overwhelming shelters today can be offered for adoption, but it's this commodification and purchase supply chain that is causing these massive breeding industries to thrive.
Okay, so I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
You triggered so many questions for me. I'm sorry. So my first question is what are people using bear bile for? Is that a medicinal thing as well?
Yeah, it's a medicinal thing. So it's the bile from the gallbladder, and I'll have to go back and look up at exactly what kind of um, remedies it was traditionally used for.
Well,
But we
let's don't
like to
give
make
people
sure
any
that
ideas. I
exactly,
just,
yeah.
I just was curious. Was that like a food thing? Was that like a medicine thing. I just had never heard of that, obviously. And then my second question is, and this was something that I really wanted to ask you, and I don't know what level of experience you're going to have if you're um, interim executive director in the U.S. specifically, but I can only imagine that taking action towards changing legislation wildly varies from government to government and country to country, right? So, like, you said that you guys were successful in the bear bile thing in, I believe you said Vietnam and South Korea, right? Is that correct? So, what does that look like? How do you get involved in those governments? Is it similar to the steps you take here? Is it wildly different? Like, what does that look like? It's so interesting.
Yeah, there are certainly a lot of differences based on, individual governments, the realities of those governments, how animal friendly they are, how open to particularly like nonprofits and civil society engaging with governments to try to influence policy change. But there's certainly a lot of similarities across the board. With the bear bile work in Vietnam and South Korea, it really relied on a lot of very strong partnerships with organizations in those countries working on this issue, working with owners of bear bile farms to show them that there are alternatives to bear bile farming to earn livelihoods and convincing them to release their bears to sanctuaries, and a lot of work really engaging government officials, both locally with those organizations that we were partnering with in Vietnam or South Korea, but even having millions of people in the United States sign a petition that we send to the Vietnamese embassy or the South Korean embassy. Those things have impact as well. And it takes time. Policy change takes decades, whether that's in
Mm,
Vietnam and South Korea or the United States.
mhm.
It's the type of work that you are in for the long haul. You're not in for the short wins. We helped to pass the Big Cat Public Safety Act here in the United States during the Biden administration, and that bans the private possession of big cat species, really in response to the Tiger King documentary really helped generate that
Mhm.
conversation in the minds and hearts of people around the US, including policymakers. But that was several years in the making to get that issue addressed in Congress.
We as Americans, we see ourselves as more compassionate or quote unquote better than other countries, right? And truly, we don't have a lot of legs to stand on, in my opinion. So my question, that's just how I feel. So my question for you is, do you see that from a cultural perspective, or from a societal perspective, that animal welfare is generally viewed very differently from country to country? Or do you see that maybe there are a lot of countries that are very similar to what I've experienced in the US, where um, big companies and big entities have a lot of influence on the cruelty of animals, but there are a lot of people and there are a lot of organizations who actually really do care and give a damn and are trying to get the work done. Like, how is animal welfare viewed worldwide, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think that's a really hard question to answer
I bet.
without making
Sorry.
some generalizations. But I think like humans as animals ourselves, like we do feel a connection to animals, and there's stories in every country and every culture about people connecting to animals, feeling a special kinship with either a certain species or an individual animal. And I think there is something intrinsic about our ability to recognize ourselves in other animal species and build those connections and come to a place of respect and concern and compassion for animals and wanting to see them thrive as individuals. I think there's a lot of stories of, once people connect to an individual animal and see them as vibrant and sentient and unique and charismatic, that it really changes their perspective on a lot of things related to animal issues. And then within that, yeah, across countries and across cultures, we all operate from our different frameworks and our different lenses and the institutions that have taught us to look at the world a certain way. And so that can impact how we approach animals and how we approach change for animals. But I think there's a lot of progress that has been made around the world, maybe in different sectors or with different species, that shows that this is a near universal concept that we do need to respect animals. We do need to protect their right to thrive and have a happy and good life. And that may look different from country to country, issue to issue, depending on the history of that region and kind of which animals are there, which animals have been exploited, and which animals have been protected. You do have a lot of movement in the European Union right now to ban fur farming and ban fur products, and that's kind of like the momentum happening there right now, in addition to some other pieces of legislation. But Poland last year was the 18th EU nation to ban fur farming. You have a lot of work happening in East Asia with bears and other species to kind of change those industries and recognize that a lot has to change to protect animals there. And you have a lot of work happening in Brazil to protect wildlife, protect their natural ecosystems, protect where they thrive. And our Brazil organization has rescued a number of animals who were fleeing fires in the Amazon, fires likely set by the animal agriculture industry. Rescue, rehabilitate, and rewild them. A couple of anteaters, some pumas, jaguar. So there's a lot of really great stories. And it's those stories that connect us to other animals. And at World Animal Protection US, we like to say humans and non human animals, because we are all part of this system.
One of the things that we've talked a lot about on this podcast, and primarily in the companion animal volunteer space, but we've sort of hinted at it a couple of times here. I would be interested to know, how do you protect yourself mentally from what you know is true out there? Because you've been doing this work for some time now. I believe you said you started in 2018, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. I started at World Animal Protection in 2018, and
Okay.
I was at another nonprofit for about 5 years before that. So,
That can be work that's very disheartening and depressing and very, very hard. So how do you protect yourself, Cameron?
yeah, it's a really good question. We actually just had a session for our team on burnout and resilience. I think 2 weeks ago at this point, and really making sure that everyone on the team is thinking about self care, setting those boundaries, making sure that everybody is taking the time and space they need to, yes, do the work that we do, which is often viewing content that is upsetting or disturbing, or even just knowing about some of these sectors that are upsetting and disturbing. So self care is really important in our sector. For me, just a lot of the things that I personally do to just fulfill myself is just take time to get outside and get some sunlight. Make sure that I have some time to breathe outdoors, move my body, even sit outside and read a book. Definitely something that is a little bit of escapism. Romanticy is big right now, and I've fallen into that trap a little bit. So, there's ways to kind of make sure that when I close my computer and step away for the day, I don't necessarily bring everything that I've dealt with at the workday into, the kitchen when I walk into the kitchen and pour another cup of coffee. Coffee is also important for myself.
Well, good. I'm glad. I hope you have all the coffee that you need to help us protect animals. So let's do this. Let's finish today's conversation by talking about some wins. So talk to me about some really cool a story you've heard, or a really cool win you guys have had lately. And if you can't think of something offhand, I was perusing the website, so I've got a couple locked and loaded if you need them.
Oh, geez, I will be really curious what the locked and loaded ones are for you. I mean, a big win for my team and our office in the U.S. has been in that pet trade work, and we have really helped to pass a lot of bills at the local level that ban the sale of most animal species at brick and mortar pet stores. So we passed one in West Hollywood,
That was one of
California
mine.
last year. It was the most expansive bill at the time, and we've had a couple more bills passed this year that are extremely expansive and cover almost every species that is commonly sold at brick and mortar pet stores like PetSmart and Petco. And that momentum is really just gaining ground. We
Hmm.
did an investigation last year into several parrot mills in Oklahoma and Texas and got video footage of just the horrific conditions for these birds who are raised crowded in cages and the mortality rates. I'll spare your listeners too many of the details, but the investigation is on our website. And it really generated a lot of attention for banning the sale of birds in particular. And we have an initiative in New York City right now. So if any of your listeners are in New York City, we just had that bill reintroduced to ban the sale of birds in pet stores. So definitely contact your city council members. There's more information on our website. But the momentum that we've achieved behind that issue for birds and for other species has been really powerful and gives me a lot of hope.
Have you been working with Voters for Animal Rights in New York
They are
in
our main
conjunction with that?
partners in New York City, yeah, so it's us
Yeah,
and
I
Voters
had
for
a
Animal
feeling.
Rights doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, I interviewed Allie on the podcast. She's incredible.
Well, she's amazing, yeah, she's been a
She's
huge asset for that
wonderful.
initiative,
Yeah, she is. I mean, if you want to get animal action done in New York, she's your number one call for sure.
100%.
Yeah, she's incredible. So, well, I love that. I love hearing the wins. And one of the wins, and actually, Allie is the one that brought this issue up to me, and I can't get it out of my head ever since she brought it up. It's the kind of like interesting thing I bring up that people don't know about when they ask me what kind of stuff I'm learning on the podcast is you guys are doing work in preemptively banning the factory farming of octopus in the United States. And you're seeing some progress there in California, I think I saw, correct?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of progress on the octopus issue and have supported a number of policies. There is a bill at the federal level that I believe is called the Octopus Act, and octopus is some acronym that they've made intentionally spell out octopus. That would ban the import and sale of octopus products in the United States. But we did help pass the Octo Act in California, and there's been some several momentum behind several other octopus related initiatives. I do credit, similar to Tiger King, I think documentaries are really powerful for
Mhm,
Americans to really connect to a story and then see the
mhm,
change that needs to be made. So I do credit, my octopus teacher, I think, for really challenging the
mhm,
way we perceive octopuses and making sure that we understand how dynamic and complex and intelligent and wild they truly are. And yet the whole concept of octopus farming is really horrific when you start to investigate what has to be the conditions for these animals who are naturally curious, naturally solitary, um, and they're crammed into containers together from birth to slaughter weight, and it causes all sorts of conflicts and issues for them psychologically and physically. And then the slaughter methods are pretty horrific as well. So there's a lot of attention and a good momentum behind banning this practice.
well, I'm glad that you guys are on the case because it sounds like the right organization is getting involved in all these things. Prioritize one thing or another. Like, I can't imagine the decision making involved at that level. Like, do you tackle the things where you know you can have momentum, or do you tackle the things that you know are the cruelest practices? Like, that's gotta be really difficult.
Yeah, a big way that World Animal Protection prioritizes what we strategically decide to focus on is about our global reach and where we have teams and country offices. So it does help that we have offices in the US and Brazil and China and Africa and Thailand. And that helps us kind of decide what sectors are really spanning these audiences that we can really reach with a collective voice and a powerful voice and help kind of change the narrative for animals and influence in policy or influence corporate behavior, and really think about the scale of impact that we can have because we're a global organization with operations in highly populous countries that are also the countries where a lot of this exploitation is happening at massive scale, or the corporations are headquartered who are doing the exploiting. So that's really one of the reasons we prioritize wildlife tourism and captive animal attractions. from the US and China and Brazil, Australia, UK, a lot of the people traveling who want to see animals as part of their vacation experience are coming from our countries. And it's important that they know what is happening behind the scenes when they see animals in captive attractions that are promising visibility of animals, promising a show or a performance or the ability to pet or pose with an animal. There's a lot of cruelty that goes into wild animals sitting still for a selfie or sitting comfortably. Well, comfortably is the wrong word. Sitting docilely to, be pet by an animal or bathed or ridden or pet by a visitor or bathed or ridden. So it's a big
Yeah.
sector for us to focus on wildlife tourism. And then we also think about, there in the US in particular, but in other countries as well, there's a lot of groups doing really, really great work on really important issues. So, where are the gaps that we fill, where we have a unique expertise or a unique capacity to work on that because other groups aren't? And that's why we really got involved in this pet trade issue with birds and reptiles and amphibians and other species, in addition to the great dogs, cats, and rabbit work that other organizations have led. So, it's really about making sure that we're adding value to the movement, not stepping on toes, not duplicating work, but certainly partnering with groups where there's opportunity to collaborate and enhance one another's initiatives.
So, how can people find your organization and get involved?
Yeah, so our website is worldanimalprotection.us. And then if you go to our drop down, there's a take action page where you can learn about all of our action alerts to either corporations we're targeting or policy initiatives that we're hoping legislators enact. And certainly can look around at our direct intervention work, which includes work with our partner sanctuaries in the US and our disaster relief fund that I mentioned. And there's a lot of good resources there, as well as an education hub if you just want to kind of learn some fun animal facts, as well as learn some ways to protect animals in your daily lives. And certainly can contact us at info@worldanimalprotection.us.
What's your favorite animal fact?
My favorite animal fact. I right now I'm on the pangolin train. Like we have I rescued several pangolins in the past year, and we have a couple of other pangolin initiatives coming up. And pangolins are the most trafficked mammal at this point
Hmm.
in the global wildlife trade, and they're the only mammal with scales, which I always just find very exciting, and they are so adorable.
They
I'm
are.
definitely in the pangolin space at the moment.
So, I feel like everybody that's passionate about something that they're doing, everybody's got a 30-second elevator pitch, something that they wish that people knew or something that they want to tell people any chance that they get. What is your 30-second, I wish more people knew this thing, Cameron?
Well, that is a really good question. Oof. I wish more people knew that they, as an individual, have a lot of power to make change. And I think we have a lot of power to make change in our daily lives by deciding what we choose to bring into our life, what we choose to include in our diets, what we choose to bring into our homes. But I do think, all things considered, with the state that we're in right now, individuals have a lot of power to call for change, demand change, really raise their voice and be that annoying, persistent voice for change. I do think in the US, a lot of policies are often changed by a handful of individuals being extremely loud to their decision makers. So there
For better
really
or
is,
worse.
for better or worse, of course.
Right.
And so there is a lot of power that I think we too often feel powerless when we're faced with these big complex systems and the big types of transformation that we're asking for. But small change matters.
I love that. I love that. So, I will share all of the incredible links and articles that Cameron has told us about. I'm obviously going to share the website in the show notes. And at the end of this episode, after our conversation, I will get into the foster spotlight, which will just be a little bit of a separate soundbite. So stay listening after my conversation with Cameron to hear all about the foster spotlight that we have for today. Um, Cameron, I can't thank you enough for joining me today, for bringing all of this information, even the stuff that makes people uncomfortable and makes people question their day to day. I think it's so important that we're at least talking about these things and exposing ourselves to these things so that we as individuals understand that we have an opportunity to take action. So thank you so much for all of the hard work that you're doing and for the time that you gave us today. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity. It's been great.
I hope you have a great rest of your day. And remember, everyone, be kind to yourselves and be kind to animals. Hi, everyone. If you'll notice in my conversation with Cameron that I just wrapped up, we did not have an opportunity to do a foster spotlight. So I wanted to make sure that I did end the episode and talk about a foster spotlight. And Cameron was generous enough to send me an email about a parrot in need of a little bit of extra attention named May May. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I want you guys to be able to see the organization that is helping May May. And this is called Foster Parrots, and it's fosterparrots.com, and they're based in New York. And the parakeet that they brought in to the organization, their name is May May. This parakeet was close to freezing to death in New York City's Central Park and is now safe with the Foster Parrots Sanctuary. Apparently, it was flying around for close to 10 weeks, and rescuers were really concerned because these birds are not fit to survive a New York winter. And that's not even talking about some of the predators that Mayway was, exposed to. So it's actually kind of a miracle that the parakeet survived for the 10 weeks that it did. So the way that you can support May May, because it does not appear at this time that May May is up for adoption, but you can take action on the Foster Parrots website to make sure that you are uh, letting PetSmart and Petco know that they need to stop selling live animals. If you are a resident of New York City, you can send an email to your council member and ask them to sponsor a ban on the retail sale of birds. And you can make a donation to protect Maymay and other parrots from exploitation. So this is a really great resource. I'm going to put a link in the show notes, but Maymay is a cute little thing, a lot of green on its body, a yellow head, and then just like this little spot of blue, almost like a birthmark. So if you are interested in supporting foster parents and the rescue of Maymay, please make sure that you check out all the links in my show notes. As a reminder, my link tree is active. You can subscribe to the monthly newsletter by going to the link tree or going to the link in my bio. And if you have anybody that I should be talking to, make sure you send me an email, thefosterfilespodcast@gmail.com. But thank you so much for listening to my interview with Cameron today. It truly was eye-opening and I learned so much, and there's just so much more that needs to be done in this world. So remember, be kind to yourself and be kind to animals.